Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to the regular board meeting of Wednesday, January 23rd. And just a couple of items before we get underway. This meeting is being held in the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. I'd like to welcome Alternate Director Ryan and Alternate Director Sandhu to our meeting today. And before we get to agenda, I'd just like to take a brief moment to announce for those that weren't aware that a very well-loved and committed environmentalist and businessman in the Cowichan Lake area passed away in December. And just wanted to take a brief moment to mention the passing of George Delure. He was involved in the Cowichan Lake Community Forest Co-op. He incredibly well respected and will be a big loss to the Cowichan Lake community. And I bring this up because there's a celebration of life in Nanaimo on Sunday, and I just, if anybody is interested, I've got the details as to the when and where. So I wanted to just make the board aware of that. And going to our agenda, Mr. Berry.
Mr. Chair, I have a few changes to the agenda proposed, the addition of 3 new items, but the deletion of 2 items. So if you are in agreement to add NB1, that's correspondence from the Cowichan Sportsplex regarding Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program grant application for a new field house. Closed session, new business 1, that's a report regarding the appointment of a bylaw enforcement officer, and also adding closed session NB2, Area I, Parks Commission appointments. And the 2 deletions, CR3, the Regional Services Committee meeting from this morning. That's because you haven't finished it, so there's nothing coming forward at this point. And the other deletion would be closed session, the staff report regarding employee relations.
We have it moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Director Staples. Any discussion, further discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? There's none opposed. The motion carries. Mr. Berry.
Next up, the adoption of the minutes from the regular board meeting of January the 9th, 2019 for adoption.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Marcotte. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Those opposed, motion carries. Any business arising, Mr. Berry?
No business arising.
Thank you. We come to our public input period. The policy is on the board, and I would encourage anyone that is interested if they would like to provide input to the board today. Please come forward. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Excellent. Next item. No report from the chairperson, or no, pardon me, public input. Delegations. God, that's 2 meetings in a row now. Like to welcome Larry Stevenson from the Island Corridor Foundation to the lectern.
I got told if I didn't turn this on, I'd be in trouble. Bear with me, I gotta find it now.
Are you like a movie star we didn't know?
Yeah, something like that.
View. And put it in a full screen mode. That's not it. Regular board meeting. There you go. Is that the beginning of it there? Okay. View in your browser, maybe?
Let's just go with it like that.
Okay. Just cut off the picture a little bit, did it?
Yeah, for some reason, and then we need to. Okay, well, we'll go with it like
this. Has it cut off?
We're good. Sorry about that, I had a little technical difficulty. Thank you for having me here today. It's good to get out in front of you folks. Some of this is going to be a little repetitive for a few of you because you've already seen it. But for some of you, I hope there's some new information in here. Since taking this job back in August, I've been kind of on a whirlwind trip around the island, and I've done 7 open houses. We had a lot of people in, over 500 people at those town hall meetings. We've are now doing the rounds with the regional districts. We had our ICF 101 meeting last week in Nanaimo, which was very well attended by some of the folks even here in this room. And part of that is because I think there's kind of a sea change that I'm trying to effect here, and that is to really open up the ICF, because I think it's been closed for far too long. So we're moving down that path, and I welcome the opportunity to come here and speak to you today. So these are a little cut off, but we'll get the idea. I'm going to just take a minute and talk about who we are, because one of the things I've found since taking over this position is that there's a lot of confusion out there as to exactly who we are. You go on social media, you go in the newspaper, there's a lot of folks out there that really have not a lot of understanding about this organization, but they have a lot to say about it. And I think that, you know, it's helpful if we take just a few minutes and talk about who we are and what we do. First and foremost, we were established in 2003. We are a federally registered charity. We operate on a nonprofit basis. And the foundation was really established to acquire, preserve, and develop the rail corridor on Vancouver Island. Three distinct things. The first part of that, of course, was acquire. The second part was to preserve. We represent the interests of First Nations and communities along the corridor. There's over 30 member corridor communities, and there's 14 First Nations groups. Governance and structure. I keep seeing this stuff in the news about this big organization that just eats money. Yeah, no, Ian, we do see that in the newspaper. And that we've got all these people on the take and all these people that are getting rich as a result of this organization. The total sum of the organization is up there on the board. There's me, and I have one full-time person who works with me as the manager of corridor development. We have a chief financial officer and a First Nations liaison that are really part-time people that just come in when we need them. The financial officer, as an example, comes in once a month and we review financials and do that kind of stuff, but they're not full-time employees. You'll see a green box up there saying volunteer committees. There used to be volunteer committees on the ICF, and they were taken away a number of years ago. And it's my intention to put them back in place. And the reason I want to do that is I think we need to get this organization back to its roots. It needs to go back to being a charity. It needs to operate like a charity, and frankly, we need the help. And there's a lot of good people out there that want to step up and help, so we want to bring them in and get them involved. What we do, acquire. So the assets were fully acquired in 2005. There's 1,620 acres of land valued at over $300 million. The corridor is in total 290 kilometers long. That takes into account Victoria to Courtenay, and then from Nanaimo over to Port Alberti. Preserve, maintain continuity of the corridor, land and asset management. That's where we are today. And I have to say those that came before me and those that are currently on the board today have done a masterful job of this particular piece of keeping this thing together. Had these folks not taken the actions that they'd taken years ago, this corridor wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have anything to talk about today, and frankly, it's an extremely valuable asset. $300 million doesn't come close to what this thing is actually worth, in my view. Develop, that's where we are now, working towards the development of a working railroad, and of course, we're continually working on trails. We have over 100 kilometers completed, and the CVRD, I'm happy to say, is a big part of that. Your folks work very hard and very closely with us to develop trails. And it's an ongoing process, and it keeps going, and we hear from them all the time. It's not as though they're disjointed from us. We work closely with them to get that done. Current status. I think this is really what everybody wants to hear about. Obviously, a primary focus of the foundation is to restore rail service to the island. You know, when I arrived here and I started to delve into this, you know, it amazed me that the number of studies that have been done on this particular piece of rail. And I can tell you as a railroad person, it's my belief, and it's only my belief in my opinion, but I think this is probably the single most studied piece of track in North America. We just want to keep studying this. And I don't know what we're studying it for, because the track is still there. The ties are still there. They've been there for 114 years. They're not going anywhere, and they don't change a whole lot. But we want to continue to study it. So we've got over 10 studies out there. Part of the problem is, in my view, coming into this, is that we've created, and when I say we, I'm saying the ICF, the federal government, the provincial government. We have created such a mess in terms of confusion among people. Because I think if we go around this table and ask people how much it's going to cost to get this railroad built, we're going to hear about 10 different numbers, or at least 10 different numbers. That's partially because of the things that we've done, and partially because of these 10 studies that we refer to here. So where are we at? I've kind of taken a bit of a different approach than my predecessor, and taken a different approach to, in fact, what the ICF has been doing for a number of years. I came in and said, you know, you need to quit talking about what it's going to cost to fix this railroad. You need to start talking about what kind of a railroad do you want. because you can't have that discussion until you actually define what it is you're going to build. And, you know, I was roundly criticized for that in some of the town halls, and I just kept saying to people, well, you want a business case, how would you like it? And, you know, I had somebody in Esquimalt that wanted to press the point, and I said, well, I'll give you an example. I have on my desk reports that say to fix the Langford to Victoria portion of this rail line is going to cost somewhere between 11 million and 300 million. So you pick. You know, it's ridiculous because everybody has a different vision of what this railroad is going to be. And until we get to a shared vision of what that is, we're never going to get this done. And in fact, the people that are going to sign the check are the provincial and federal governments. So we might want to talk with them about what it is they think they want before we start telling them about what it's going to cost, because that's kind of the approach we've taken. And I think we've had some success with that. You know, we finally pushed the Horgan government to a point where they said, let's have the stakeholders meeting, of which you were a part of, which took place on December the 10th. Clearly coming out of that meeting, the civic leaders, the districts, had all come forward and said there's really only a few things they want. They want a commitment, they want it now, and they want us to get going. And that's really what came out of that meeting. Now, following that, we had a discussion with Mr. Taven on December the 21st where she agreed to undertake an assessment of the road. And that would be the starting point for trying to put rail back into place on this island. We had a follow-up meeting with them on January the 10th, which frankly was more than a little surprising to me, because we went into the meeting and the view of the assessment that they want to take is somewhat different than ours. They want an assessment that's going to take until the end of October of 2019, and it's going to get rolled into their 2020 transportation plan. So I don't know what you think. That sounds a lot to me like another study that we can put on the side of the end of the desk and look at it just as that. The really unfortunate thing is that we could have rail in place between Langford and Victoria by the time they figure out the 2020 study. So we're going to have another discussion tomorrow with the minister. We are clearly at odds with what they have suggested. Now, in fairness to the minister, she's been away. She's going to be back tomorrow, and this is on her agenda to have this discussion with us because we really need to get this kind of clarified, because there's a timing issue here. And the timing issue is that we're looking at a federal election coming in October. If we don't have something into the federal people by probably mid-June, we're going to wait until the federal election's over. So we're probably talking sometime next year. If we go with the 2020 study, you're likely not going to see rail here until probably 2022. So there is, you know, some sense of urgency here to move this forward. And that's where we're at. Questions?
Excellent. You were under the 10 minutes. Well done.
Go fast.
Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, sir. To the December 21st meeting, and just so everybody's clear, I mean, some of us were there, the mayors of Duncan and Ladysmith, Chair Morrison was there, and I was there. There were two different visions on the table. There was a lot of pressure. It was the first time I've ever seen Lisa Helps and Stu Young agree on anything. That it was all about commuter rail in the South End. Mm-hmm. And the rest of the people at the table said, no, and including yourselves, said, no, the foundation has a mandate to look after the entire corridor, right from Courtenay south and west out to Alberni. What's your sense of where the province is on that sort of difference of opinion now?
Well, when we started our conversations with the province, they had initially said that they were only interested in Langford to Victoria, as you know, because we've had that discussion. They today, and in our discussions with Minister Taven following, said that no, they will look at the entire island. They did hear that clearly at that meeting. Because we as an organization said, look, you know, we are charged with trying to rebuild this system for the entire island, not just Langford to Victoria, because the people in Courtenay think they're just about as important as the people in Esquimalt. And we've maintained that throughout, and we've told the province flat out, there will be no deal if it's Langford to Victoria only. It has to be an entire solution. Now, that being said, we've also said that obviously there's a sense of urgency in the Malahat area and in the CRD, and you have to build this thing in stages anyway. So common sense would say that you start in Langford, you build the Langford to Victoria piece, but that doesn't mean you get to stop there, and that's been our position with the province, and they've agreed with that.
Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm one of those cynics that
Good.
have looked at the ICF and just shaken my head in bewilderment and wonder, because I can remember seeing the ad, and you're the new CAO. I can remember seeing the ad that appeared in the newspapers for the CAO, which said no previous rail experience required. And that to me was an indication of just where this organisation wasn't going. I can remember riding on that train with my granddaughter and having a great time just from Duncan to Victoria, just to take her on a train. I love trains. I think they're great. We've all seen the decimation of trains in Europe and various other places, which now have got brilliant networks. 10 studies, and I'm glad you pointed it out because I was going to point it out as well, but I just can't understand why nothing has been done. Since 2003, how much has been given? How much have you got left, and what's been spent? What's been actually spent on?
Okay, you covered a lot of ground there, so we'll go back. The railroad experience issue. I agree with you, but I can because I have 25 years of railroad experience. Is it absolutely critical in this role? I think it's very helpful because I do bring a bit of a different view of it, and I see some things that happened here over the past few years that I would have never done as a railroad person. That's not to say I was right, but it does bring a different viewpoint for sure. And you know, the board's been very good because when I sat down with them, one of the things I'd said to them is, look, if you're looking for somebody that's just going to administer this place, I'm not your guy because I'm going to shake trees and I'm going to upset people. Because to me, I don't understand why this hasn't been built either. And I've made the statement many times, and some of the people in this room have heard it. If this was CN or CP, we would have settled this over coffee in the morning. I don't understand it. I mean, we keep wanting to complicate this thing. It's not complicated. It's really not. You know, and why it's not here today is beyond me, quite honestly. I mean, it should be here. It makes infinite sense to have it here, particularly when you think about 30, 40, 50 years down the road. I mean, this becomes a backbone of a transportation system, and it should be looked at in those terms. It shouldn't be isolated as, oh, it's those railroad guys again, you know, because it does fit in, and it has to be comprehensive, and it has to link into the rest of the island. You know, so I would love to sit down at the table as an example with BC Transit. You know, how do we build a commuter system that fits into BC Transit? How do we make sure that intercity trains or regional trains are meeting in with the needs of the people in the local communities? You know, and I know Aaron has some very strong thoughts about, you know, how BC Transit and how trains fit in his neck of the woods. So I'm with you. I don't understand either. And I can tell you that the very first time I met John Horgan, the first thing he said to me, we didn't say anything else. He walked up to me and said, I'm frustrated with trains. And I said, well, that's good, because so am I. And so is the rest of the island. You know, I mean, I can't answer why. But I will say this. I think it's a public will discussion, and the public has to get behind it. And that's why we're out doing the things that we're doing. And I can tell you the feedback I'm getting is probably 98% positive. People want this train.
Short follow-up.
I agree, yeah, and the reason why you weren't, and please excuse me if I'm being a bit blunt here, people have got frustrated and just said, why bother? Nobody's done anything for 15 years. All this money's gone into a pit and not been seen again. I honestly do hope you can get something going, because all I want to see is trains going up and
Well,
down
let's
that
talk
track.
about the money in the pit for a minute. You know, one of the things I didn't put on these slides is that this organization takes no public funding whatsoever, not from provincial, not from federal, not from civic. There's no funding that comes to us. There's no money pit. It's completely self-funded. We self-fund through leases. We self-fund through TELUS. We're not on the public dole. Again, there's another one of those things that's flying around out there in the public. Now, there was money committed. The province still has their money. They admitted that at the meeting on December the 10th. I think some of the municipalities still have their money. This is an issue of really getting the provincial government to sign on. And once they sign on, the feds have told us that they will sign on as well. But there's no money pit. There's no money pit. Now, there is expenditure at the civic level, you know, because you guys have maintained crossings, you've done those types of things, but those are federal requirements. You have to do that. We don't have a choice. It's not because we want to do it. It has to get done. So, but there's no money. There's no money pit.
Thanks, Larry. Director Toporowski.
Thank you. Larry, I just was looking at the slide here representation, the interests of the First Nations.
Yes.
And then it says current status, stakeholders, meetings, regional district mayors, and civic leaders. It's not clear to me that the First Nations is sitting in the room, or if they,
They were there. They were there for the meeting as well,
okay.
at our request, I
Okay.
might add.
And like you said, if you went around this table and asked 10 of us here, we would give you different numbers on how much it would cost to repair the railway. And we're not experts on rail either, probably. I can say that here. But yeah, so just because you've kind of inherited this and you've been here for 5 months and you've probably seen how it's deteriorated, the rail. So we're just looking at that and having that funding come forward for that, and echoing Wilson's, Director Wilson's thing about a lot of money put into this initiative and moving forward. I'm not an expert in it, but like you said, I probably have heard many stories as well. Thank you.
If you were looking for the cost, is that what you wanted to know, what the cost was? Sure. A very baseline cost to fix the entire system, to get it to a point where it's workable, is going to run probably about $150 million. And that's the entire line. That's all 290 kilometers. Now, that sounds like a lot. Sounds like a big number. I like to compare it to the $1.65 billion that they're going to spend over in Surrey to go 10 kilometers. We're going to do 1/10 of that, is really what it would cost. But again, you have to go back to the province and say, what is it you want? That's a very basic service. That'll reinstate service. We'll have service up and down the island, but I don't know that that's necessarily what they want, because when you talk to them about what's going to happen in Langford, there's a very different set of needs in Langford than there are even in Duncan, or different needs in Port Alberni. So it's going to be a series of different things, and I think Al had alluded to that. It's not going to be the same system all over the place. It's going to have to be different by virtue of the differences in each of the regions.
Thank you. Director Kuhn, followed by Stone to close, I believe.
I would I would agree with you. I've heard that too. Many people would like to have this railroad functioning. I hear comparisons with Europe at times, and I lived in Switzerland for some years, and I love rails. I mean, I've been on railways all over the world, and train travel is my favorite travel. There's some things though that don't add up. Switzerland is about a third bigger than Vancouver Island, but they have 8.5 million people living there. So that would be comparable to Vancouver Island at let's say 6 million. Well, we are at what, at 850,000. So to get a properly functioning line, even just a line to, let's say, Nanaimo, with all the crossings, I was told the same figure that he quoted, 150 million to fix the whole system. And I was told that would entail replacing every third tie. That's how that figure was arrived from what I looked into. Now, I've walked the line. It wouldn't be enough to replace every third tie. The ties are in bad shape. I mean, you look at the ties and the nails or the screws in that. It's not a good system. So you'd have to do an awful lot more work with that. Also, I don't know if the 150 million included all the crossings and securing the crossings, because that's an immense expense. And so the question that really comes up is the expense. Yeah, it could be justified if you have the population. But the way I see it, and I've done a lot of calculating on that myself, because I was intrigued by this whole thing too. Between Langford and Victoria, I can see, yes, there is enough population to justify that extension. I can't see it up here. I don't think we have enough people to justify it. So either you'd have to raise the fee so high that nobody would use it, or you'd have to skimp on the renewal in a way that the crossings wouldn't be all secured. In that case, the train would have to constantly slow down, as we had it in the past. I've been on that train. And then people would just keep driving the car. So you have to be competitive. You have to be fast. Well, if you want to have a fast train system, man, it is expensive to establish that. So failing the population density that you would require for that, you'd need an awful lot of subsidy. And that's, I think, where the stumbling block is. Who would pay for all that? Because you can't recover the cost by the fare. There's just no way you can do it. So who's going to support it? So then you'd be leaning on local government, on federal and provincial. Yeah. Okay.
I hear what you're saying, and I don't necessarily disagree. I mean, you've got an issue here with population density, but again, you're back down to a public will discussion, because I can point you to people that say this is a social discussion as well, because we've got people on this island that can't get to doctor's appointments because they don't drive anymore. They need another method of transportation. Our rail operators, SVI, will tell you there's four pillars to this, and as long as they get 3 of the 4, they can remain profitable. You mentioned subsidies. You know, is this going to have to be subsidized? Probably. Portions of it will be. To what extent, I don't know, but I would challenge you to say, do you know what the subsidy is for every man, woman, and child in BC for BC Transit? It's $33 a head. Every single one of them. If I had $3 a head, you'd have a Cadillac railroad system. So, to me, the argument about subsidies doesn't hold a lot of water, and I'm going to go back to the public will portion of this. You know, it's a public will discussion. Do you or do you not want rail service on this island? I can tell you the economic benefit. If you move aside the subsidy issue, the economic benefit to the communities that this train service will run through is massive. It's absolutely massive. And it's, you know, it's things like tourist trains. It's things like the cruise ships coming in. It's the ability to move up and down the island. I mean, I run into kids every day here in Duncan. I live in Duncan. They're trying to go to school in Nanaimo, and it's hard for them to get to school. If they had a train system to get there, they'd be on it in a heartbeat. You know, when we did our town halls, I'm up in Courtenay, and I've got a 78-year-old woman saying to me, I can't get to my doctor because my husband doesn't drive anymore. I need a train. I got to have a train. People want the train. So, you know, I hear what you're saying on the cost side of it. We don't have the density that Europe has, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have a train either. Okay?
Thanks, Larry. And everybody seems to forget freight. So I've got Director Stone, Smith, Staples, anyone else, and Marsh. Director Stone.
Well, since the list got longer, I'm tempted to cede my spot, but I just want to, you know, make a couple of points. And I think that we're in the situation we are today because of decades of transportation policy in the province, where our rail has largely been abandoned, especially in terms of freight. I can just say I would, you know, maybe it's because it's a present discussion over the last few months, but I will say that every night I go home from these meetings, and I'm more often than not struck by the amount of logging trucks and stuff on the roads in bad weather that impede your transportation. So as you move freight and things like that, when we were all kids, I'm not, you know, I may be a little bit younger than some, but I remember the log trades. Sorry, Joe. Log trains going through. I would never take a shot at a fellow director, but staff's fair game. No, but I remember, you know, watching the log trains go by. We lived, our property backed onto the railroad, and train after train and car after car was loaded with logs, and that's frankly how Ladysmith survived until the mid-'80s, was the processing of logs in the harbor, loading them on the trains or off the trains, and continuing on. Now all that traffic has been moved to the roads. And then you've got your cargo freights as well that are all road bound now, and then you look at the costs of maintaining the roads. Our passenger vehicles are not the biggest sources of wear on our roads. Disproportionately, it is the moving of heavy machinery, freight, and so on the roads rather than the rails. Rail is much more suited from a design perspective to carry heavy loads. And then you get to the congestion piece, and that's a whole nother piece. Move all that freight off the roads, and all of a sudden your roads become a lot more breathable, if you will, and so on. So we're looking at decades of transportation policy, and when we're looking at rail, we need to look decades in the future around transportation policy. And Director Kuhn's points are very well taken and very correct. However, we need to also look at the distribution of population tends to be clustered around the rail. So at least from that Nanaimo to Victoria portion, not in the most dense areas of Europe, but there are places in the United States and Europe where rail is functioning and profitable that have the same kind of densities we have, especially between the Nanaimo and Victoria locations. And then you add somebody like the Langford commuter potential, and then if you bundle all that together, you do reach that minimum density required to make it workable. And I do have some faith in looking at the broad portfolio of a group like Southern SVI and their other portfolios. They know the business well, and they've said that they will operate the rail. But then from a transit perspective, you brought up the point, I wrote it down. When you talk about subsidy, there's nothing more subsidized than transit, other than maybe pool facilities and ice rinks, but we're well aware of those kinds of subsidies at local government. That being said, I think that the most important thing is it's the cost around conversation comes back to the thing, like you said, around vision, which creates the standards, which determines the cost. When you're saying every third tie, it's that 40-kilometer-an-hour sort of Class C, is it? At that speed, at that work level. So yeah, you've got a slower train. You replace all the ties, upgrade the rail, do over or underpass crossings and stuff, and you can get that speed up much more dramatically. But as Mr. Kuhn had said, or Director Kuhn had said, it's much more expensive. And you also have, I noticed at the meeting, was that just last week? It feels like weeks ago.
It was just last week.
There's a lot going on. Was the contingent there from partners like the RDN, who had been sort of withdrawing from the conversation a bit, and having some brief conversations there? There's a lot more attention, and conversations that I've had with members in Nanaimo around our transportation issues regarding transit and rail are much more open-minded now than they were just a couple of years ago. So I think that's a really good sign, not only for our transit needs and moving our people, goods to education, work opportunities, but also, like you said, the rail opportunities. So I'm just thankful that you're there. I think that the lens that you look at this from is a lot more informed. And I think the relationships you're trying to build, even though there's some really tough conversations, I'm thankful for the work that you're doing. So I think as a result, we're having those meetings, and that means difficult conversations, and that means trying to find that common vision. But I would like to see how that develops over the next few months, and I'm hopeful. So thank you for doing the good work. And I think that through the lens of the work that you're doing, we will be able to make a decision in the coming horizon that really sees if it's going to be something that goes forward or not. So I thank you for that work and being willing to have that conversation that may result in maybe something we don't necessarily want to hear, those of us who support rail, but at least getting that answer that we need to either fish or cut bait, if you will. Thank you so much.
Can I make two comments? Because I forgot to address the issue of the ties, every third tie. In fact, that baseline document is a 75% tie renewal rate. So 75% of the ties are going to come out, and potentially more. I would be remiss if I didn't, Aaron brought up the freight portion of this, and I would be remiss if I didn't talk just for a minute about Port Alberni. Because if there's a pot of gold here, it's sitting in Port Alberni. We currently have a port sitting up there. When you go up there, it's sad. It's empty. There's nothing there. There's nothing on their docks. There's no ships in port. I'm of the belief that you don't have a railroad, you don't have a port. You've got to have the two of them. And, we've created a parking lot around this island, and I know some of you have had to deal with that issue. We've got freighters parked everywhere. So, my view is you put rail back in place in Port Alberni, you put it to 286,000 standards, you open that port up and you start bringing ships in there and hauling freight out of Port Alberni, you put it on a rail barge, take it across, hand it off to one of the 4 big Class 1s, and keep going. There's no stop in Vancouver anymore for those ships. I mean, that's just it's a great story, and it's one that we need to keep talking about because, Aaron, you're right. You get that freight portion working, the rest of it just falls into place, and it's going to offset those costs.
And I'd just like to remind the board that we've got a full board meeting and the continuation of regional services. And I really want to get to the emergency preparedness meeting at 6 o'clock in Lake Cowichan tonight. So if you could keep your comments succinct, please. Director Smith, Staples, and Marsh.
So I agree totally with Aaron, and I would almost pass, except that so often what people are hearing is about passenger train, and that's what's sticking in people's minds. And people know that a train never seems to go at the time you want it to go or the direction you want it to go, like a lot of transit. And the impact that comes with putting the freight and the commercial onto the train tracks. We also have to look at emergency response for situations that have occurred across Canada. And will that be part of the budgeting process as you move along?
It's an absolute given. Honestly, I don't see a lot of dangerous goods moving on this island, but there will be, no question. The emergency response stuff is like breathing to a railroad. And I can assure you that SVI has a very clear plan on what to do with emergency response stuff. But that being said, that's all going to have to get ramped up locally, because every railroad I've ever worked for, I mean, those contacts are in place at the regional districts, and you know who you're going to call, and there's a protocol that's followed to make sure that the event of some type of a disaster, a rail car goes in a river or something like that, that it's responded to appropriately. But that'll absolutely be part of it.
Follow-up?
Just another question is, the infrastructure where the loading and the unloading, is it gone on the island or is it recoupable?
It's all still in place.
Director Staples.
Thanks for coming and presenting today. I've been at
Thank
the
you.
last two meetings, and so I feel like every time I listen to it, I sort of gain something else. The last one, I think one of the biggest thing was Port Alberni in terms of the port itself, but freight and then also tourism. One thing I haven't heard come up today is around the commuting pressures, though, that what this would actually take off the Malahat in terms of commuting pressures for our community. My significant other commutes every day, and sometimes it's over 2.5 hours. And how many times has Malahat been shut down this year alone because of accidents? So also, you know, just the cost of the safety aspects of this for the people who live in our communities and have to commute every day. This would give them other options. And as well as opening up the commuting to Nanaimo, not only for school, but for, that was one of the first things we discussed when I came to this board, was around the new transit sort of, you know, future of that. So this makes sense to be built in as part of that. And I really want to thank you for the work that you're doing, because I think you're doing an excellent job at bringing the people together, making sure everyone is there. And as Aaron, our Director Stone said, you know, moving through really difficult conversations and not being afraid to know that that's part of this process, and that there's a way through. So I really want to just appreciate that. And my question for you is, what are the next steps from here? And is there anything that you need from us at this point in time?
The next steps from here are going to kind of be determined, I think, tomorrow afternoon. And I will circle back to everybody here with how that conversation goes, because it's really going to depend on the response we get from the minister. You know, if she comes out and says, no, this is our plan and we're sticking to it, there's going to be some trouble. But on the other hand, if she comes back and says, whoa, wait a sec, that's not quite what I wanted them to do, and, you know, if we have that discussion, then it's going to go a different direction. So I will certainly be back to you on what we can do. I just wanted to comment on your comments relative to the Malahat. Putting a rail system in doesn't resolve those issues. I think everybody certainly recognizes that. What it does do is it hopefully, you know, takes some of that pressure off, and hopefully we do run the trains in the right direction. I wasn't here when that was happening, but I heard they were running in the wrong direction, so we'll take care of that.
Director Marsh to close.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
I feel encouraged about this. My stepfather was an engineer for the CPR, so I've ridden many a train, heard all the cursing that happens in the engine. But I also have fond memories of being a child and going in from Chase River into Nanaimo on the train with my grandmother. And the social aspect, I think that was the train really connected folks. It was a little slower time for those seniors, and I really hope that you can make it all happen. And I'm quite excited to hear the thoughts with Port Alberni. And perhaps even if that, I don't know, I think there could be a lot more happening even in terms of tourism maybe. And
Oh, huge, huge.
yeah, so good luck, and I hope that we can assist
Thank you.
in some way.
And I too would like to thank you for coming and just note that I had an interesting perspective as I think Director Stone sat across from me at the meeting down in Victoria, and it was really quite eye-opening to have, I think Mayor Young was at one end to my right and Mayor Helps was at the other end of the meeting on my left, and they were in complete agreement about moving forward a section from Langford to Victoria, and jaws dropped around the room. It was really quite something. But it sounds like you've got that message that it's the whole corridor that we're concerned about. And I hope you take that into your meetings, and good luck with that. And I appreciate you coming today, and thank you very much.
Well, and let me just say in closing, thank you so much for having me here. I do honestly believe the more we have these discussions, the better off we're going to be, because it's going to take a village here. You know, I can't go in there and ram this thing through any more than any one of you can, but I think collectively, and when I say collectively, I mean the districts on the island, the First Nations groups on the island, our civic leaders on the island, the more we come together and coalesce here, the better opportunity we're going to have to get this done, and the better opportunity we're going to have something that we want, as opposed to something that's just been thrown out there. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Berry, no report from the chair. Correspondence.
Correspondence, we have a letter from School District 79, and they're requesting a letter of support for their Cowichan Place campus project definition report.
Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We received this same request at North Cowichan. The timing for us was such that I couldn't get this to a council meeting, so I did one with the help of staff. But I mean, we've all seen this. It's interesting, the deadline that's attached to this, January 25th, that's led to some speculation, and I don't want to go too far with this, but you know, if they want it done that quickly, and if the province is asking for it that quickly, you have to ask why. There's a provincial budget coming in February, so maybe there's a line item in that provincial budget for a new high school in Cowichan. I don't know. But I would like to make a motion that the board authorize the chair to write a letter of support for the Cowichan Place campus project.
Seconders all around the room. Any discussion? Director Marsh.
Just curious if the board thinks, because I've looked at the letter and it looks exactly the same as what the staff and you did, Mayor Sebring. So do we want to do a cookie cutter letter, or do we want to do something a little bit?
I think we can leave that to staff.
John's, okay.
Just if I may, Mr. Chair, we based our letter in North Cowichan somewhat on the sample letter, but there was some stuff we took out and some different things that we added. So it's just the top and bottom, I think, that are the same.
Mr. Elzinga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were maybe some additions to the letter. There was a meeting held today between the school district staff and transit staff around a transit hub, and there may be some additions that we can add to the letter, so I'd like to put that forward. I would also like to comment, because the letter talks about preliminary conversations, and those were really held with staff at the Island Savings Center, so just making sure everybody's aware. The Island Savings Center Commission has not seen this. I see Director Sebring nodding, and I just wanted to make sure that the preliminary conversations were held with staff to try and assist school district staff.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? That motion carries. None opposed. Mr. Berry, committee and commission reports.
Yes, Mr. Chair, the first committee report from the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of January the 16th, and that would be Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you. The report and recommendation of Electoral Area Services meeting of January 16. I'd like to move 1 through 9. 1, that the grant and aid for Electoral Area B, Shawnigan Lake, in the amount of $500 be provided to Francis Kelsey Secondary School Dry Grad Committee for support for Dry Grad celebration. 2, that a grant and aid for Electoral Area B, Shawnigan Lake, in the amount of $1,000 be provided to Francis Kelsey School for 2 bursaries for graduating students residing in Electoral Area B, Shawnigan Lake. 3, that a grant and aid electoral area B, Shawnigan Lake, in the amount of $1,000 be provided to Cowichan Secondary School for 2 bursaries for graduating students residing in electoral area B, Shawnigan Lake. 4, that a grant and aid electoral area D, Cowichan Bay, in the amount of $250 be provided to Francis Kelsey Secondary School's Dry Grad Committee to support Dry Grad celebration. Number 5, that a grant and aid for electoral area D, Cowichan Bay, in the amount of $1,000 be provided to Francis Kelsey School for 2 bursaries, graduating students residing in electoral area D, Cowichan Bay. Number 6, that the grant and aid electoral area D, Cowichan Bay, in the amount of $1,000 be provided to Cowichan Secondary School for 2 bursaries for graduating students residing in electoral area D, Cowichan Bay. Number 7, that a grant and aid for electoral area D, Cowichan Bay, in the amount of $3,000 be provided to the Cowichan Estuary Nature Center to help cover costs of their 3 projects. Number 8, the first stage approval be granted for takeover of the Bald Mountain, Golden Shores, Bear Land Strata Corporation sewer collection system and pump station, provided the following conditions are met. And there's 3. Do I need to read the conditions too? Yeah, I do, okay. The sewage system must be reviewed and approved by engineering services staff to ensure compliance with CVRD design standards and subdivision approval bylaw 1215. 2, all lands on which the infrastructure works are located be transferred to the CVRD except where not practical, in which case will be placed within registered statutory right of way using the CVRD standard charge terms and upon meeting these conditions. And 3, a utility transfer agreement with assessment management documents be completed and executed between the CVRD and the strata. Number 9, that the 2019 Public Safety Division work plan include researching the hiring of an independent third-party consultant to conduct a detailed seismic evaluation, a building code review, and an evaluation of operating effectiveness of the Satlam Fire Hall, provided other Public Safety Division projects prioritized by the board have been completed, and that appropriate budget funds are available. I move 1 through 9.
Second by Director Acton. Any discussion on any of these items? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That motion carries. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Electoral area directors only vote on the following under Part 14, Planning and Land Use Management of the Local Government Act. Number 10, that a positive recommendation be forwarded to the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch, LCRB, for a non-medical cannabis retail store operating license to the applicant at number 6, 3050 Allenby Road. 11, the development variance permit application DVP 18D03 Eleanor Street, 5184 Eleanor Street be approved to vary zoning bylaw 3705 section 7.8.4B by reducing the building setback from the northwest parcel from the 6.0 meters to 2.44 meters and reducing the building setback from the southeast parcel land adjoining lands in the ALR from 15 meters to 1.68 meters.
Can I stop you there for a second? Did you just want 12 pulled? So perhaps we can deal with 10 and 11 now. Would you move those, Director Yanni DiNardo?
So moved.
Second by Director Nicholson. Any discussion on 11 and 12? Electoral area directors only. Call it 10 and 11, sorry.
Yeah, you,
Yeah.
okay.
All those in favor? Those opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Number 12.
Okay, number 12, the development variance permit application number DVP 18B04 690 Arc Road be approved by varying zoning bylaw number 985, section 5.2, by reducing the building setback from the southwest, north, and south parcels for not less than 30 meters to 23.6 meters, 8.9 meters, and 0.3 meters, respectively. And section 5.21 be reducing the parcel distance separation from a rural residential zone from not less than 300 meters to 215 meters.
Moving that item.
So moved.
Seconder. seconded by Director Acton. Discussion. Seeing none. Electoral area directors, all those in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries. One opposed, motion carries. Does that conclude your report?
That does. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Yanni DiNardo. CR2, Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Report and recommendations of Director Services Select Committee meeting of January 17th, 2019. The recommendation is as follows, that the first choice of benefit coverage for elected officials that wish to participate is to enroll in the enhanced plan. I need my glasses. While staff researches other carrier options.
You move that item, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Director Smith.
Do you have any breakdown of the costs of this program and any other programs?
Yes, it's available in the staff report, and we can make those available to you. Don't have them with us today. That's a recommendation from committee. So we will provide those to you. There's further follow-up to happen. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? That motion carries. Mr. Berry.
Moving on to staff reports. The first report from the Finance Division regarding the Spring Security Issuing Bylaw number 4254. This is the information as to why the bylaw is on later in the agenda. We don't need to do anything with that right now. Second report regarding the Spring Security Issuing Bylaw number 4255. Same thing, the bylaw is listed on the agenda, and this is the background for your information. Staff report 3 from the Water Management Division regarding the ICIP program Rural and Northern Communities Grant. And it's a 4-part recommendation. Number 1, that an application for grant funding through the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program Rural and Northern Communities Grant for the Cowichan Bay Marine Recreation Enhancement Project in Area D for an amount up to $1,331,125 be submitted, and subject to grant approval, the board approves funding of operating reserve funds for any cost overruns and ineligible items. Number 2, there was a previous resolution that was related to this. This replaces it, so you would have to rescind resolution number 18-550.5.4. Number 3, that an application for grant funding through the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program Rural and Northern Communities Grant for the Missachi Lake and Honeymoon Bay Sewage Collection and Treatment System Project in Area F in an amount up to $7,776,034 be submitted, and subject to grant approval, the board approves funding of capital reserve funds, operating reserve funds, and connection fees from partners and new customers for any cost overruns and ineligible items. Same thing, there was a previous resolution that can now be rescinded, and that would be the rescinding of resolution number 18-550.5.2.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion? Director Acton.
Just to clarify, I think it's obvious, but any of the overruns, it would still be, those costs would be the system users? Correct, right? Okay.
Yep.
For clarification, Mr. Chair, that's in Resolution 3, not the first part. The users don't pay the overruns there, we do.
Hang on, look to staff. I think it speaks to overruns and ineligible items in the operating reserve, so I think Director Acton's correct on both items, as I read it. Okay. I had Director Smith and Director Wilson. Director Smith.
I'm just wondering about, there was $2 million received by Missachi Lake Sewer a couple of years ago. How does this fit into this amount that's being applied for?
Mr.
And the
Dennison, would you come
overruns?
forward, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delight to be here. So we got some grant funding. It was about the total project value is 1.5 million, of which the local community provides 17%, and the rest is grant. And we're working on that now. That ties together Missachi Lake and Honeymoon Bay and puts the first part of the disposal capacity in at Honeymoon Bay at this property that we're getting potentially getting through the rezoning process. This application now is for Phase 2, which would then provide for servicing in Honeymoon Bay, which there is not now at all. There's only on-site systems on the properties, which are as old as the hills from the 1940s and whatnot. Replaces the very dilapidated sewer servicing in Missachi Lake with new servicing that would presumably meet environmental standards. And then provides for replacement of provides for new treatment capacity with a Class A plant on those same lands where the disposal is being put now. So it basically provides a sewer service for Missachi and Honeymoon Bay in one system that would address environmental matters and provide for the community for the long term. It's 100% funding as this particular program, if you have populations less than 5,000, you can get 100%, so we're applying for that. So the community, there's no cost to the community, and would be a gateway to the future, we believe.
Thank you, Mr. Dennison. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, first of all, congratulations on getting 7.7 million for that area.
No, it's just an application.
So it begs the question of, and I'm sure Mr. Dennison can answer this, as to the Cobble Hill one that's got 2.4 million, but still has to pay a parcel and user tax. What's the difference here? Why is there such a large discrepancy between one area and no extra fees and my area that has extra fees on top of the sewage improvement?
So there would be, so to be clear about this, there would be operational costs that the communities would have to pay after that. So it's the capital comes in at 100% funding. That's this, and on the capital side, that's just this particular program. They're all different. There's all kinds of infrastructure grant programs that are always coming through. Some of them, the one we got for the earlier one for Missachi was 83% funding. Sometimes they're 2/3% funding, sometimes they're 50-50. Cobble Hill and Mill Bay was 100%. They're just all different. But we apply for them all because getting money in the door is much better than not getting money in the door. So it's always worth doing. Yep.
Seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That motion carries. Mr. Berry, SR4.
Moving on to SR4 from the Legislative Services Division. This is regarding the Transit Amendment Bylaw text revision that's on later in the agenda. In discussions with the province, this just gives the background. It's basically cosmetic, housekeeping, updating of the language. The intent of the bylaw hasn't changed. We'll be rescinding third reading later and then giving it third reading as presented. So that's just for information there.
SR5.
Also from the Legislative Services Division regarding the establishment of the date for the Parcel Tax Review Panel. And there's a recommendation that the sitting of the Parcel Tax Roll Review Panel be held on Wednesday, February 20th at 12:30 p.m. here at this building.
Do we have a mover? Moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Staples. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. Next item, Mr. Berry.
Moving on to the bylaws. Third reading of bylaw 4237. We need to rescind that.
Moved by Director Still and seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Those opposed? None opposed. The motion carries.
Bylaw 4237, we need to amend the bylaw in accordance with the background report and the bylaw placed in front of you.
Moved by Director Still and seconded by Director Sebring. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? And those opposed? None opposed. The motion carries.
And then finally, the bylaw 4237, third reading as amended.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Smith. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Those opposed? None opposed. The motion carries.
Bylaw 4254, security issuing bylaw, first three readings.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Marcotte. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? And those opposed? None opposed, the motion carries.
And bylaw 4254 for adoption.
Moved by Director Marcotte, seconded by Director Marsh. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries.
Bylaw 4255, security issuing bylaw, first three readings.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Those opposed? None opposed, the motion carries.
And bylaw 4255 for adoption.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Kuhn. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Those opposed? None opposed, the motion carries.
The next bylaw for electoral area directors only, bylaw 4225, South Cowichan zoning amendment bylaw. This is for 145 Okotoks Drive. Be adopted.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Those opposed? There's none opposed, the motion carries. Mr. Berry, next item.
Moving on to new business, we have a letter from the Executive Director of the Cowichan Sportsplex, similar to the one we had earlier today. A letter of support. They wish to apply for an Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program grant, and this is for a permanent field house. So if you wish, a motion.
I think we need a little bit of input from Mr. Elzinga on this one, because this is a little peculiar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do agree with that. I'd like to raise 2 or 3 points with the committee for their consideration. The first point is my congratulations to the municipality of North Cowichan on the successful obtaining of Rowing Canada, and as part of that National Training Center, the proposal is to have a building at the Sportsplex as well as a boathouse at Artman Park in North Cowichan. So that is certainly something that's going to be extremely beneficial to the region. I cannot understate what I think this means for recreation going forward. The second point that I'd like to raise is the Sportsplex is the one of our 9 regionally significant facilities that is not operated by the Cowichan Valley Regional District. It has been financially supported over the years for a period of time, 3, 4, 5 years by a regional grant and aid, and now on an annual basis by areas A, C, D, and E, as well as the core funders of North Cowichan and the City of Duncan. And the third piece of information that I'd like to propose is that the CVRD has 2 other facilities applying for the same grant application. So this is the Island Savings Center for the replacement of the chiller, and the Kerry Park Recreation Center and the Shawnigan Lake Community Center for parking lot replacements. So this application could potentially be seen in competition. However, I still think it's a great project, and wouldn't it be nice if all 3 got money? So I leave that to the committee.
Director Yanni DiNardo.
That is a little complicated, you're right. My area is already supporting that, but there is so many things with Island Savings when we talk about it at our commission too. It would be great if all 3, but I think that we should be sticking to the ones that belong to us.
Thank you, Director Sebring, Marsh, and Acton. Director Sebring.
This one's, I understand this one's a bit awkward, but I would argue that while not from a legal perspective, but certainly from a community perspective, the Sportsplex belongs to all of us. The Rowing Canada piece that Mr. Elzinga referenced, this may actually become part of that. The design that the folks at the Sportsplex have come forward with includes expandability because when they were putting this grant application together, we didn't know that we'd got the Rowing Canada piece yet, but it includes expandability for the dryland training facility for Rowing Canada. So the design may, if we get this grant, evolve, and there's extra money on the table from Rowing Canada to add on to do their dryland training. It's all part of a larger parcel. Originally, before we were given to understand that the CVRD was making some applications for some grant money, there was some discussion about perhaps some funding as well coming from this table to supplement this grant application should it be successful. I don't know whether that's coming forward right now. That would complicate things even further. But I would just say to the board that, based on what Mr. Elzinga said, we can only hope that all 3 of these move forward. They are distinct applications. Mr. Chair, if I may, to Mr. Elzinga, how do you, based on your history and knowledge of these grant things, and maybe I'll be sorry I asked this question, but what's your perception of how this would go forward if we supported this, plus we had the other two?
Mr. Elzinga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to Director Sebring. With this particular grant application for a regional district as opposed to a municipality, there is one grant application per community. And so this is interesting because the Sportsplex currently receives funding from A, C, and D, as well as E, so that overlaps communities with the Kerry Park application, and with DE, North Couch and Duncan, which overlaps communities with the Island Savings Center application. So I would expect a phone call from the funder to seek some clarification on that, but I would, still support the application.
So, based on what you've just said, I haven't got the alphabet totally clear in my head, but even the two applications coming from the CVRD have some overlap.
That's correct.
Right, okay.
If I may, Mr. Chair, and just speak to the one other issue
Go ahead.
around funding. Director Sebring raised the issue of funding. I do not anticipate a request from the Sportsplex for funding for the field house in 2019. Could potentially happen in future years.
Thank you. Director Marsh.
So I think, Mr. Elzinga, I'm going to need a little clarification. So are you saying that the other two applications are under the funder's criteria are just as muddied as this one?
So our managers at the Kerry Park Recreation Center at the Island Savings Center have been in contact to clarify as best they can the separation between those. It's a little bit clearer between those two. Area D is really the overlap between those two applications. But the Sportsplex covers both of those areas. So when you put a grant application, obviously you try and put your best foot forward. I'm certain the Sportsplex would say that it would have regional benefit doing that. By saying that, it does overlap communities.
So, yes, follow up, thank you. So are you saying that, would they look at the region then and say, okay, so what I'm guessing is everybody from all over the province is applying for this money.
That's correct.
And so how I look at it is, we have 3 projects that people in our region all think are worthy to apply. The adjudicator is the funder. To me, wouldn't it be a shame if we didn't support this and the other 2 didn't get funded and we got nothing? I kind of think that I trust the funders to put every application up against their criteria, and if it rises to the top, then it'll rise to the top. And I'll give just a little bit of an example, because I think that these are separate enough, and maybe this isn't relevant, but under the housing file, I really believe if we had in North Cowichan put in separate applications for the transitional housing for women and children and the housing for people on assistance that don't have those issues of abuse, we would at least have had that transitional housing for women and children built. And so that just taught me that we have to sort of dance with the one who brought us, so to speak. And so they're going to put each of these applications up against their criteria. And if they think they all fit and they're all worthy, maybe they'll fund them all. And anyway, so I would like to support this one just as much. It is a regional facility. I think everyone in the valley benefits from these regional sports events that have happened in the past, and I know there'll be a lot more of them when this is done. So I'd like to recommend that we support this with a letter as well.
Thank you. I've got Director Acton, Staples, myself, and Director Wilson. Director Acton?
Just a point of order. Did Councillor Marsh just make a motion?
No, she didn't.
Okay.
Well, I kind of did. But I don't have to.
You said that you were supporting the
Okay, well, I don't have to,
notion
but
of a letter,
I'm happy
so
to.
I'd like to go through the rest of the
Okay.
people on the list if I could, please. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This does seem to be a little bit of a what's fair. But my question too, I heard four different electoral areas that are involved in this, and obviously if there's a new building, there's gonna be more expectations of maintaining it and et cetera, and it wasn't lost on me that you said it was only for this year, maybe no tax requisition. Have they had this conversation, these areas, or is this, is this kind of new here? Because this, right? It's gonna, there's a future to this, so, anyway.
Mr. Elzinga, I can't wait to hear this one.
Mr. Chair, I'll give the short version.
Thank you.
So, because there is a long, long history to this, but let me say that there was a one-time regional grant and aid funding for the Sportsplex for operational expenditures. There was a referendum held, I believe it was 2014, area by area, with areas now providing annual funding, which is less than the regional grant and aid portion, again for operational funding. The Sportsplex has also come forward in the past with a request for capital funding in 2017 for track replacement in the new format you have for regional grant and aid, where you have the grant and aid portion and the strategic investment portion. Out of the strategic investment, this board funded a capital project of $75,000 for track replacement, so you do have precedent for doing that. And this would potentially be another capital, or could it potentially be operating requests in the future. Hard for me to speculate.
Okay, I've got Director Staples, myself, Wilson, Nicholson. Did you have your hand up, Director Kuhn? No? Director Staples.
I don't know that I have much more to add, other than in the sake of fairness for the application process, I feel like I'd like to make a motion that can I do that right now, or do you want to get through the list? Really? Okay. So I feel that, yeah, in the sake of fairness, this is something that's a value to our community, and they should have the exact same opportunities that the other two applicants have.
Thank you. I just want to make a very brief comment that, and I haven't forgotten, we've discussed after I was elected your chair, we discussed the notion of a grants review, a grant application review committee dealing with finance as well. I haven't forgotten about it, but I think this would be the sort of perfect example that we would like to see flow through and adjudicated by a group of us to consider, these sorts of things. So I haven't forgotten about it. We'll probably look at it closer towards the summer. I'll go to Director Wilson, Nicholson, and then I'll go back to Director Marsh for a motion. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Elzinga, I'm in the same position as Director Acton. This is a fairly new one on me with the Kerry Park. Now, did you say that was a car park resurfacing project? Did I hear you right? And I've got a follow-up after
Mr.
that.
Elzinga.
That's correct. So my understanding of that grant application off the top of my head, Director Wilson, is a $1.5 million project for replacement of the parking areas at the Kerry Park and upgrading of the parking areas at the Shawnigan Lake Community Center for a combined project. This is similar to the environmentally friendly parking lot projects that we've completed at the Cowichan Lake Recreation, at the Cowichan Lake Sports Arena, as well as the Island Savings Center.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay. I am in broad support of this letter of support, but this is one of those things that would have to be very carefully worded because it's so open-ended. And I'd like to see the word conditional in there somewhere. Because if you write a letter of support and say, yep, that's great, we support you 100%, it's going to come back and bite you unless you say, look, yes, we do support you subject to, or with the word conditional in there. That's the only change I would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you. I think staff will listen to the remarks of the committee when the letter is written. Director Nicholson, and Director Nicholson.
Does the Sportsplex have an asset management plan for their facility?
Mr. Elzinga.
I can't speak to that. There's certainly assistance given to the Sportsplex from staff at North Cowichan, and so they may be providing that sort of assistance, but I can't speak to that.
Can I follow up?
Certainly.
I think in this application, you have to provide a lot of information about how you're going to manage these infrastructure assets into the future. I think so.
I believe you're correct.
Yeah, I think I filled out something like that. So I think we should, you know, we're all contributing to them, and we really care about asset management for Island Savings Center, and because we're contributing to the Sportsplex, I think we should think about how we can require that. Because it's not a grant, it's I mean, it is sort of, but it's like, it's going to be big bucks in the long run if this place continues to develop, so we need to understand that it's being managed well. Anyway.
Thank you. I will go to Director Smith as the last speaker on this item.
So it's my understanding that Island Savings is a CVRD asset, and the CVRD has title to that asset. And Kerry Park and Shawnigan Lake are also CVRD assets, and the CVRD holds the title to those properties. But the CVRD does not have that, the Sportsplex is not a CVRD asset and is not under our asset management, and the CVRD does not hold the title to it. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe that to be correct.
That's my understanding.
Yeah. Turn to Director Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move that the Chair, on behalf of the board, send a letter of support for the application of the Sportsplex for some grant funding to build the
Fieldhouse.
Fieldhouse. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder? Seconded. Any discussion? Director Stone.
So just point of clarification, what are the contributing areas to the Sportsplex then within the regional district? Areas D, C, A?
So all the contributions are separate,
Yeah.
unlike other recreation
Yeah.
centers. So the 6 contributors, to my understanding, are the Municipality of North Cowichan, the City of Duncan, Electoral Area A, Mill Bay Malahat, Electoral Area C, Cobble Hill, Electoral Area D, Cowichan Bay, and Electoral Area E, Cowichan Station, Satlam Glenora.
Okay, so if this was a successful grant application, those areas specifically would be tasked with maintaining that asset for the long run because they would be contributors to it? Or is it just a flow through like a grant and aid?
Mr. Elzinga.
I'll try my best on that one, and maybe Mr. Kieber can help me out, but I believe all of those functions are at their maximum requisition for their contributions to the Sportsplex at this point.
Okay, I can anticipate, oh, we built this great new facility and 5 years down the road, it needs to get repainted and so on and so forth, and they may be coming back for maintenance. And with the referendum being not approved in all of the other areas, I don't think it would be possible for them to come back, so that burden would be solely on the ones that agreed to participate in that function.
So if I may, Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Elzinga, I think I know what your answer is.
Well, first point is to go back to clarification, because I said maximum requisition. Of course, that's only for the electoral areas, not for the Municipality of North Cowichan or the City of Duncan. The board has deferred a discussion on funding of 9 regionally significant facilities until 2019. So I would anticipate through your strategic planning process in the spring that may be a topic for how you address funding facilities like the Sportsplex going forward. I think that's probably the best answer I can give.
Director Sebring, followed by Acton.
Just to add to the earlier question about ownership, the entire Sportsplex property is owned by North Cowichan. We lease it to the Chesterfield Sports Society, which also means we own the infrastructure and the buildings there. And we have, as a municipality, stepped up with major money, but we keep coming back here because we believe in North Cowichan that this is a regionally significant facility. And that, you know, based on usage and based on a whole bunch of other things, that the regional district also has a stake here. But at the end of the day, and I want to be gentle in how I say this, but I recall that a few years ago, the Cowichan Chesterfield Sports Society came to us and threatened to give us back the keys and said, we can't afford to do this anymore. You guys take it over. It's your property. We'll just forego the $1 a year lease and away you go. That's, in some sense, North Cowichan's worst nightmare, but that also, in some sense, is this board's comfort that if that building needs a new roof in 5 years and you're maxed out on requisition, it's actually our asset and we'd probably be stuck with it. And I hate to publicly admit it, but that's sort of the other piece of the reality here, so.
And just like to remind everyone that the motion on the floor is to write a letter in support of a grant application.
Fair enough.
Director
I'm just
Acton
trying
to
provide
close.
background.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would I be allowed to add an amendment to the end of it?
If you feel the need, sure.
To include the other two grant applications in lieu of fairness, so that we could also send letters of support for those other two applications?
There are applications. Mr. Elzinga?
Mr. Chair, if I may, specifically to that, Mr. Berry has already provided the resolutions that this board has put forward in support of those applications.
Okay.
I'm going to call the question. Everybody's clear on what the question is? Letter of support? All those in favor? Those opposed? There's none opposed. Oh, none opposed? Motion carries. Next item. She was late getting her hand up, that's all. Mr. Berry?
The next item is a closed session, new business item. We have a question period.
Oh, it is. It says CSNB 2, or NB 1, yep. Question period. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to pose a question to the chair on the items on the agenda today? Yeah, there's one back there. Seeing none, motion to resolve into closed session under the items listed below. Moved by Director Stone, seconded twice by Director Kuhn. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion carries. Take a few minutes.